What's going on, everybody? My name is Trey, and today I'm going to be talking some Super Bowl 59 between the Chiefs and the Eagles. The Chiefs opened up as a 1.5 point favorite, and wow, did that prove to be so wrong. The final score was the Eagles 40, Chiefs 22, and honestly, that was way more generous of a scoreline than the game actually went. The Chiefs scored, I think, 2 touchdowns in garbage time, the last 4 or 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. Um, but so that made the game look closer on paper than it actually was. If you watch that game, Chiefs never stood a chance. Okay, so starting off with just a straight quarterback comparison, knowing that Pat Mahomes' stats are probably a little bit inflated given how that fourth quarter went. Pat Mahomes, 257 yards, 21 for 32 on pass attempts, 3 touchdowns, and two interceptions. Sorry, and two of those touchdowns came in that last 5 minutes. 6 sacks for a loss of 31 yards, 25 QB rush yards, and truthfully, he probably ran more behind the line of scrimmage, just trying to avoid the pressure from the Eagles defense than he actually did down the field. No rushing touchdowns for Pat, and then one lost fumble for him. So 3 turnovers total for Pat Mahomes, which is uncharacteristic. Jalen Hurts, 221 pass yards, 17 for 22 on attempts, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. And it probably wasn't even a bad decision to make that pass, but the throw was poor for him. I think it was to A.J. Brown. Should have put it in the end zone, threw it short, and it was picked off. He did take 2 sacks for a loss of 11 yards, but he had 72 rush yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and did not fumble the ball at all. So really protected the ball well, with the exception of that 1 interception. So moving on to the Eagles. What did they do well? Well, starting with the Eagles offense, Jalen Hurts he managed that game incredibly well. And he made really good decisions on critical downs. Second down, second and long, third down, and fourth down. He made all the right decisions. Like I said, saved that one poorly thrown ball on the interception. On paper, it looks like Pat had a better game than he actually did. But remember, most of those yards came late in the fourth quarter when the Eagles were already pouring the Gatorade. Uh, Shout out to the Chiefs defense for stopping Saquon Barkley in the rush game as well as they did, but really it came at the cost of their secondary, right? Once they committed to stopping the run, their secondary just became like Swiss cheese, and Jalen Hurts was just dotting them up every chance he got. Another thing that the Eagles did to adjust, knowing that the off-tackle runs and really the runs in general for Saquon Barkley weren't working well, they started to use him more in the swing pass and the screen game, which allowed him to get the ball on the edge and make some plays. And he actually did. He did pretty well with that, right? It was a way to get him outside without handing it off to him. It looked like he had some issues with slipping on the turf early in the game. He wasn't really able to cut like we've seen him do in the past. So they kind of started going to this outside screen and pass game to him, and it worked to tremendous effect. And the Chiefs defense could never decommit from stopping him up the middle, right? They couldn't do that because the moment you do, he breaks a big one and they get even more momentum. But as a result, the mid-range and deep pass game opened up for the Eagles because KC is committing 6 to 8 guys to stopping Saquon Barkley every play. You have to respect it. In the moment that you don't, he's going to break one off on you. I think his longest run was for 10 yards, I think. But he had pass plays for 20 plus yards. So the Eagles found a way to keep him in the game, keep him involved, and keep him making an impact without handing it off to him up the middle like we've seen them do to tremendous success the entire season. So for the Eagles, that offense, Jalen Hurts took what the Chiefs defense gave him in the mid-range and deep pass game, and then the Eagles offense adjusted well to what Kansas City was doing to put the ball in the hands of their playmakers in a position to make something happen. As for the Eagles defense, the defense won them the game, unquestionably. Okay? Eagles defense, that 4-man rush, they controlled the game. And that's ultimately what won them the game. the Eagles' defensive line put so much pressure on Pat Mahomes that more than half the time he was hit. So if he dropped back 32 times, on 17 of those plays, he was either sacked or hit. So, I mean, that right there changed the game because he was so uncomfortable in the pocket in the pass game that he was not the Pat Mahomes that we're accustomed to seeing. So that's a testament to how well Josh Sweat, Milton Adams, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Moro Ojomo, Jalix Hunt, Brandon Graham, they controlled this game. They won that championship, that Super Bowl for the Eagles. I think that if there was a collective MVP that could have gone out, it would have gone to that Eagles defensive line. The entire defense played well, don't get me wrong, but that defensive line, it they controlled it. They really did, and it helped their secondary because their secondary covered incredibly well. Pat Mahomes couldn't find an open receiver at all. Really, most of that game, he couldn't find an open receiver. He's facing so much pressure, but then also the secondary is covering incredibly well. Like every level of that Eagles defense played probably the best game of their season. Um, After the first four possessions, Kansas City only had 20 total yards of offense compared to the Eagles, who had 151 yards of total offense after four possessions. And not only that, the Eagles defense forced Mahomes into 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions, and 1 fumble recovery. As good of a game as you could hope for against a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback. I mean, baby Brady, right? So to force him into 3 turnovers and to limit him in the pass game as much as they did, and they stopped the run on top of that, this for them was nearly I'm going to call it the perfect game, right? I'm going to throw away those 2 touchdowns at the end. They did score. The Chiefs did score 1 touchdown in like the third quarter or something like that late, but I mean, this was a perfect game for the Eagles defense, and they even managed to score a touchdown of their own on the Cooper DeJean pick 6. So X factor MVP. If I could give it to the entire Eagles defensive line, that's what I would do. But I know it goes to one person, and Jalen Hurts honestly deserved it because of how well he played on offense. Look, just to start, despite them being down 24 to zip at halftime, the Kansas City defense was actually playing pretty well. They just weren't getting any help from the offense whatsoever. And when you're on the field that much and asked to do so much, it's only a matter of time before your defense starts to buckle. I think the first 3 or 4 possessions for the Chiefs, they were all 3 and out. So as soon as the defense gets off, they do their job. They're called right back into the action because the offense couldn't get anything going at all. So talking about that Chiefs offense, to put it bluntly, the Chiefs pass protection was abysmal. That is the worst I think that I've ever seen them play. Probably their worst offensive game of the season, save that last game against the Broncos where most of their starters didn't even play. It was bad. And not only was the Chiefs pass protection so awful, but the receivers couldn't even get open. I mentioned before that the Eagles secondary, with the help of that defensive line, right, they were just smothering all the receivers. Like they could not find any avenues to pass the ball down the field. Like I said, I'm kind of removing those last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. Pat, I mean, he was scrambling for. It looked like he was scrambling for his life. Honestly, he probably had more yards running behind the line of scrimmage than he did down the field. 25 rush yards down the field, all of them on scrambles, and he probably ran 50 or 60 yards, horizontally, just trying to avoid pressure. He couldn't get out of the pocket like he usually does because the Eagles' defensive line wouldn't let him. And he was hit so many times in the game, which was just so uncharacteristic for Pat Mahomes. And we didn't see him make the magic that he usually does. Usually when he gets out of the pocket or if he's unbalanced, he can still make a play. But it just seemed like he missed more passes this game than I've ever seen him do in a single game in his career. He was missing left, missing right, missing short, missing low. It was a very weird Pat Mahomes game to say the least. Like this is the worst game I've ever witnessed him play, to be totally honest. And he usually plays well through contact with pressure, and that just non-existent, non-existent. But again, that's I it's more of a testament to the Eagles' defense than him playing just a really poor game, right? They did not allow him to get comfortable. They did not allow him to put himself in a position to make those magical moments that we're used to seeing from Pat Mahomes. Um, so it wasn't even him playing poorly. It's the Eagles defense making him play poorly because of how they schemed up the defense. Moving on to that Kansas City defense. For what it's worth, they played the rush really well. They limited Saquon Barkley to 57 yards on 25 carries, which is exactly what you would want out of your defense playing the Eagles. The problem is their commitment to stopping the run left them vulnerable in the secondary. And as a result, they let up too many big pass plays against that Eagles offense. Every single Philadelphia receiver that had a catch had one for 20 yards or more. So 5 receivers had a catch that game. Every single one of them had at least one catch for 20 or more yards. That says it all right there. That mid-range and deep pass game for the Eagles, worked so well. So well. And it really was just Jalen Hurts taking what the defense gave him. Another thing about that Chiefs defense, they didn't, with the exception of the one bad pass from Jalen Hurts, they didn't force any turnovers, and they barely put him under pressure. They did sack him twice, but on most of Jalen Hurts' dropbacks, he had so much time to just find guys and wait for people to get open. And yeah, so for everything that Kansas City offensive line didn't do, the Eagles offensive line did well. So this was not a matter of the Chiefs, playing below expectations or anything like that. The Eagles won the game. The Eagles made the Chiefs play that poorly. They embarrassed them. Really. This was not the Chiefs they didn't prepare where they didn't know. The Eagles played that well that it forced the Chiefs into a lot of mistakes on both sides of the ball. And, for what it's worth, I do want to mention the refereeing this game. I thought that early on there were 2 soft calls against both teams. They called one against the Eagles that I thought was really soft. And then they called one against the Chiefs that I also thought was soft. But for the most part, it's not the usual refereeing that we've seen when Kansas City plays, especially when it comes to protecting Pat Mahomes. So I think that's a good thing, right? For the most part, the refereeing, it was a non-factor. There's nothing really to talk about other than those first 2 soft calls, in my opinion. I think that this was a really strong win for the Eagles, and I think it raises a lot of questions for how the Chiefs move forward with their quote-unquote dynasty, because I think that this game really highlighted the Chiefs' vulnerabilities and showed just how strong the Eagles are on both sides of the ball. So again, congratulations to the Eagles on winning Super Bowl 59. I know that it's going to be a party in Philadelphia for the next week or two. I'm impressed not just that they won, but how they won. It was a dominant victory for 3 3/4 of a quarter, right? That last few minutes of the fourth was the only part where they let up a little bit, but with good reason. So shout out to the Eagles. Nick Sirianni probably earned himself a big contract boost, as did Jalen Hurts, as did some of the other guys on the Eagles defense, right? That Eagles team earned themselves a lot of money playing as well as they did. And I'm really excited to see how they move into next season. It's always different going into a new season, right? But they proved themselves. They proved that they belong. There is no question whether they're a contender, whether they're as good as nothing. They shut up everybody, really out the gate. So an impressive win for them, and congrats to the Eagles.